I stared at the GPS on my phone, watching the signal bars disappear one by one as I drove deeper into nowhere. The truck stop materialized out of the darkness like something from a horror movie, a single island of fluorescent light surrounded by empty fields and forest. Perfect. Just what my life needed right now. The parking lot was mostly empty except for two big rigs and a beat-up sedan that had seen better decades. I sat in my car for a minute, checking my bank balance one more time. $43.16. The rent notice crumpled in my glove compartment said I had 5 days to come up with $800 or find a new place to live. I grabbed my messenger bag and walked toward the building. The automatic doors wheezed open, revealing a standard convenience store setup. Rows of snacks, a coffee station that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 90s, and a register counter manned by a guy who looked like he'd been carved out of old leather. "You Taylor?" His voice matched his appearance, rough and worn down. "Yeah, hear about the job posting." He looked me up and down, taking in my deliberately unremarkable appearance. Jim Morrison. And before you ask, no relation to the singer. He gestured toward a door marked office behind the counter. "Come on back." The office was barely big enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that looked like it had survived a small war. Jim settled into his chair with a slight wince, favoring his left leg. The walls were covered with schedules, supplier invoices, and what looked like newspaper clippings, though I couldn't read them from where I sat. So, Jim opened a desk drawer and pulled out a laminated sheet of paper. Night shift position. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 nights a week. Pays $18 an hour. I tried not to let my relief show. $18 an hour was more than I'd made at any job in the past 2 years. What's the catch? Smart question. He slid the laminated sheet across the desk. Read this first. The paper had 5 numbered rules typed in bold letters. 1. If a large black dog appears at the front door, fill a metal bowl with water and place it outside. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak to it. Return inside immediately. 2. If you see a hitchhiker on the security cameras, do not acknowledge them. Do not go outside. Do not offer help. They will leave on their own. 3. If a black car without license plates pulls into the lot after midnight, turn off all lights and lock all doors. Hide in the office until it leaves. 4. If twin girls in matching clothes enter the store, retreat to the office immediately. Do not speak to them. Do not listen to them. Wait until they leave. 5. If a man in a trench coat asks for a ride, give him directions to the Mitchell farm instead. Never offer transportation. I read it twice, waiting for the punchline. Is this some kind of hazing thing? Jim's expression didn't change. You think I'm messing with you? I gestured at the paper. This reads like a creepypasta. He rolled up his left sleeve, revealing his forearm. 4 parallel scars ran from his wrist to his elbow, deep enough that they'd probably required stitches. The skin around them was puckered and discolored, like the wounds had been infected. Rule number 4, he said simply. Took me 3 weeks to heal up proper. I stared at the scars. They looked real. They looked recent. What happened to the last person who worked nights? Jim pulled open another drawer and retrieved a manila folder. He spread out several newspaper clippings on the desk. The headlines made my stomach drop. Local man found dead in vehicle. Woman disappears during night shift. Employee hospitalized after breakdown. Derek Hawkins. Jim tapped the first article. Found him in his car about 10 kilometers from here. Coroner said heart attack, but Derek was 28 and healthy as a horse. He moved to the second clipping. Maria Silva, single mother, 2 kids, vanished completely during her shift. Security cameras showed her working normally, then nothing. Like she just walked out of existence. And you're still operating? Someone has to. He gathered up the clippings. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. This job has risks. But if you follow the rules exactly as written, you'll be fine. The pay reflects the... unusual circumstances. I looked at the laminated sheet again. $18 an hour was more than I'd ever made. With 4 shifts a week, I could cover rent, groceries, and maybe even start paying down some debt. What about the security cameras? Backup? Other employees? You'll be alone from 11 to 7. There's a security system with monitors in the office. He pointed to a corner where I could see the edge of a screen. Cameras cover the parking lot, pumps, and store interior. There's a panic button that calls the county sheriff, but they're 40 minutes away on a good day. And if I break one of the rules, Jim's scarred hands folded on the desk. Best case scenario, you end up like me. Worst case, you end up like Derek or Maria. I thought about my bank balance, about the eviction notice, about the stack of rejection letters from every decent job I'd applied for in the past 6 months. When do I start? Tomorrow night, 11 p.m. sharp. He opened the filing cabinet and pulled out a W-4 form. I'll train you on the register and show you the security setup. After that, you're on your own. I filled out the paperwork, my hand shaking slightly as I signed my name. Jim watched me with those steel blue eyes, like he was measuring something. One more thing, he said as I stood to leave. Out here, confidence kills faster than fear. The things that show up, they can sense when someone thinks they're smarter than the rules. Don't be that person. I folded the rule sheet and slipped it into my pocket. Anything else I should know? Yeah. Jim's expression was grim. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever tries to convince you to break those rules, remember that 4 people didn't make it home because they thought they knew better. I walked back to my car, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the empty parking lot. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Jim in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway and watching me leave. The rule sheet crinkled in my pocket every time I shifted gears. $18 an hour. I kept repeating that number as I drove back toward town, trying to convince myself I hadn't just signed up for something that would get me killed. But $43.16 doesn't leave much room for better judgment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps as I unlocked the front door at exactly 11 p.m. Jim had left 20 minutes earlier, giving me a final rundown of the register system and pointing out where he kept the cleaning supplies. The whole place felt different at night, bigger somehow, with shadows pooling in corners that seemed perfectly normal during the day. I pulled the laminated rule sheet from my pocket and read through it one more time, then taped it to the wall behind the register where I could see it clearly. The paper felt ridiculous in my hands, but Jim's scars had looked real enough. The first few hours passed without incident. 3 truckers came through, one buying coffee and energy drinks, another grabbing a sandwich and chips, the third just using the restroom and buying nothing. Normal people doing normal things. I started to think Jim had been messing with me after all, some elaborate joke to see if the new hire would actually follow his weird rules. By 2 a.m., I'd restocked the candy aisle twice just to have something to do. The silence was getting to me. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of dead air that makes you aware of every small sound. The coffee maker gurgling. The freezer units cycling on and off. My own breathing. I was arranging bags of chips when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound like fingernails on wood. The sound came from the front door. I froze, a bag of barbecue chips still in my hand. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate. Not random, too rhythmic for wind or debris. I crept toward the front of the store, staying low behind the shelves. Through the window, I could see the parking lot bathed in harsh white light from the overhead lamps. The 2 trucks were still there, drivers probably asleep in their cabs. And sitting perfectly still in front of the door was the biggest dog I'd ever seen. It had to be the size of a small horse, with black fur that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light rather than reflect it. The thing sat like a statue, not panting or moving at all. Just watching the door with eyes that caught the light wrong, too bright. too reflective, like mirrors instead of living tissue. My mouth went dry. Rule number 1. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone to reread the rule. Fill a metal bowl with water. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak. Return inside immediately. The scratching stopped. I looked up to find the dog staring directly at me through the glass, even though I was standing well back from the window. Those mirror-bright eyes tracked my movement as I stumbled toward the back of the store. The sink was behind the coffee station. I grabbed the first metal bowl I could find, a dented mixing bowl Jim probably used for something mundane like making chili. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the faucet handle. Water splashed everywhere as I filled the bowl, some of it hitting the floor, some soaking into my hoodie. The dog was still there when I approached the door, sitting in exactly the same position. I fumbled with the lock, trying to turn it quietly, even though that made no sense. The door opened with a soft whoosh of night air that smelled like pine trees and something else, something organic and wrong. I set the bowl down about 3 feet from the door, careful not to look directly at the animal. Even in my peripheral vision, I could see it was massive. Its shoulders came up to my waist, and its head was the size of a basketball. The dog stood up. I scrambled backward into the store, slamming the door and turning the lock. Through the glass, I watched the thing approach the bowl. It moved wrong, too fluid, like it was floating just above the ground instead of walking. The dog lowered its head to drink. No sound. Its tongue lapped at the water, but I couldn't hear anything through the glass. Not the splash of water or the wet sounds a normal dog would make. Just silence. It drank slowly, deliberately, never taking its eyes off me. Even with its head down, those mirror-bright eyes stayed fixed on mine through the window. I wanted to look away but couldn't, like I was caught in some kind of trance. The bowl was empty in less than a minute, though it had held at least 2 cups of water. The dog straightened up, water dripping from its muzzle. For a moment, we stared at each other through the glass. Then it turned and walked into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights, disappearing between 2 trees like it had never been there at all. I stood there for 10 minutes, waiting for my heart to stop hammering. When I finally worked up the courage to check the door, I found deep gouges in the wood around the handle. 4 parallel scratches that definitely hadn't been there when I'd arrived. The rest of the night crawled by. I kept checking the security monitors, jumping at every shadow that moved across the screens. At 4 a.m., movement on the parking lot camera caught my attention. A young man stood at the very edge of the light, right where the pavement met the grass. He had sandy brown hair and wore a button-down shirt that looked too formal for hitchhiking. A torn backpack hung from one shoulder. He was staring directly into the camera, not looking around or trying to get my attention, just standing perfectly still and staring at the lens like he knew I was watching. His face was pale and serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. My first instinct was to go outside and ask if he needed help. The guy looked harmless enough, maybe a college student whose car had broken down. But Jim's voice echoed in my head. 4 people didn't make it home because they thought they knew better. I checked the other monitors. The hitchhiker didn't show up on any other camera, just the one covering the front parking lot. He stood there for 20 minutes, never moving, never blinking that I could see. His eyes stayed fixed on the camera the entire time. Then he turned around and walked backward into the forest, his face still pointed toward the building until the trees swallowed him up. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When Jim arrived at 7 a.m., I was sitting behind the counter with 3 empty coffee cups in hands that still shook when I tried to hold them steady. "How'd it go?" he asked, like he was asking about the weather. "The dog came, and there was a hitchhiker." Jim nodded, unsurprised. "You follow the rules?" "Yeah. Good." He walked around the counter and checked the door, running his fingers over the fresh scratches. "These are new. Dog must have been hungry." "Hungry for what?" Jim looked at me with those steel blue eyes. You don't want to know. I was gathering my stuff to leave when Jim called out from behind the register. Taylor, check the lost and found box before you go. Might be something there that interests you. The lost and found was a cardboard box under the counter, filled with the usual debris. A pair of sunglasses, some loose change, a phone charger. At the bottom, I found a brown leather wallet. The driver's license inside showed a thin-faced young man with sandy brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Derek Hawkins, age 28. The same face I'd seen staring into the security camera. Jim, I called out, but he'd already disappeared into the office. I drove home with Derek's wallet on my passenger seat, trying not to think about how a dead man's ID had ended up in a lost and found box, or why he'd been standing in the parking lot at 4 a.m. $18 an hour, I reminded myself, but the number didn't feel as comforting as it had yesterday. I was getting the hang of this weird job. 3 nights in, and I'd developed what you might generously call a routine. Show up at 10:50, check that the rule sheet was still taped behind the register, test all the door locks twice, position myself where I could see the security monitors without having to turn my back on the windows. Tonight felt different, though. Heavier somehow, like the air pressure had dropped. I kept catching myself holding my breath for no reason. At exactly midnight, headlights swept across the parking lot. My stomach dropped as a black sedan rolled in, moving way too slowly for someone just stopping for gas. The car was pristine, like it had just rolled off a lot, but something was wrong with it. It took me a second to realize what. No license plates, front or back. Rule number 3 hit me like a punch to the chest. I killed the lights so fast, I nearly tripped over my own feet. The fluorescent humming died, plunging the store into darkness except for the green glow of the exit signs. My hands shook as I turned the deadbolt on the front door, then ran to check the back exit. Locked. The office door. Locked. I crouched behind the counter, trying to make myself as small as possible. Through the windows, I could see the sedan's headlights still on, cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The engine was running. I could hear it idling, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the engine noise. I pressed myself against the floor, breathing as quietly as I could manage. The security monitors were still running on backup power, but I didn't dare lift my head to check them. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling the building. They paused at the front door, and I heard the handle rattle as someone tested it. The footsteps continued around to the side of the building, then the back. Another rattle. The rear exit, then the office door. Each door handle turned slowly, methodically, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. Taylor? I nearly bit through my tongue. The voice came from right outside the front windows, muffled by the glass, but clear enough. It was my mother. Taylor, honey, please let me in. I'm hurt. My brain went into freefall. Mom lived 800 kilometers away in Toronto. There was no way she could be here, no reason she would be here. But the voice was perfect. The slight rasp from years of smoking. The way she always made my name sound like a question. I don't know where I am, sweetheart. My car broke down and I'm bleeding. Please, I need help. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still hear her. She was crying now, that specific hiccuping sob she'd done when Dad left. The sound that used to make me drop everything and run to comfort her. Taylor, why won't you answer me? I'm scared. There's something wrong with my arm and I can't feel my fingers. She was using my childhood nickname now, Tay Bear, the one she'd called me when I was small and afraid of thunderstorms. Please, Tay Bear, I just need to use the phone. I won't stay long, I promise. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my hands harder against my ears. This wasn't real. Mom was in Toronto, probably asleep in her apartment, completely safe. This was exactly what Jim had warned me about, something trying to convince me to break the rules. But it sounded so much like her. The voice changed. Now it was my dad, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "Taylor, what's wrong with you? Your mother is hurt and you're just sitting there. Open the door." His voice had that disappointed edge that used to make me feel like I was 6 inches tall. The tone that said I was failing at something basic and obvious. "She's bleeding, Taylor. She needs help, and you're being selfish." Then my grandmother's voice, shaky with age. "Sweetheart, I don't understand why you won't help us. We're family." The voices kept cycling. Mom, Dad, Grandma, my cousin Jake, my high school friend Sarah. Each one more desperate than the last. Each one begging me to open the door, to help them, to stop being cruel and selfish. I don't know how long I stayed there, curled up behind the counter with my hands over my ears. The voices blended together sometimes, creating this horrible chorus of everyone I'd ever cared about telling me I was failing them. At some point, I started crying. Not from fear, from guilt. Even knowing this wasn't real, even remembering Jim's warnings, part of me wanted to open that door. What if I was wrong? What if Mom really was out there, hurt and scared, and I was just hiding like a coward? Then, all at once, the voices stopped. The silence was so sudden it felt like a physical blow. I lifted my head slowly, listening for any sound. Footsteps, breathing, the car engine. Nothing. I waited another 10 minutes before crawling to the window. Through a tiny gap in the blinds, I could see the parking lot. The black sedan was still there, but now someone was walking back to it. The figure moved normally enough, but something was off about its proportions. Too tall, maybe, or too thin. It reached the car and turned back toward the building for just a moment. Where its face should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth skin, like an unfinished sculpture. The thing got into the car and drove away. I checked my watch, 3:30 a.m. exactly. I stayed crouched behind the counter until sunrise, jumping at every small sound. When Jim arrived at 7, I was still on the floor, my legs too shaky to stand. "Black car?" he asked, taking in my appearance. I nodded. "You stay inside?" "Yeah, but Jim..." I pulled myself up using the counter edge. It knew my family's voices. It sounded exactly like my mother. Jim's expression darkened. What did it say? I told him about the voices, the cycling through family members, the way it had used my childhood nickname. Jim listened without interrupting, his scarred hands folded on the counter. "That's how it got Maria," he said finally. "Used her kids' voices. She lasted longer than most, almost 2 hours before she opened the door. What happened to her?" Security footage shows her walking out to the car at 3:30 a.m. She got in willingly, even smiled at something the driver said. Car drove off, and that was it. Never found her or the vehicle. I thought about the smooth, featureless face I'd seen. The thing driving. It didn't have a face. They never do. That's how you know it's not real, no matter how perfect the voices sound. Jim walked around the counter and checked the windows. "Come here." He led me to the front window and pointed at the glass. Handprints covered the surface, dozens of them, overlapping and smeared. Some were small, like a child's. Others were huge, with fingers too long to be human. "These weren't here yesterday," Jim said. I stared at the prints. The security footage. Won't show anything. Never does with the black car. Far as the cameras are concerned, nothing happened here last night. We stood there looking at the handprints, evidence of something that officially didn't exist. I thought about Maria Silva, a single mother who'd probably heard her children's voices calling for help. How long could anyone resist that? "Jim," I said quietly, "how many people have you lost to that thing?" He was quiet for a long moment. Maria was the third, but she lasted the longest. I drove home with the windows down, trying to get the sound of my mother's voice out of my head. The handprints on the truck stop windows had looked desperate, like whatever made them had been trying to claw its way inside, or maybe trying to claw its way out. 2 weeks of night shifts had turned me into a paranoid wreck. I jumped every time the coffee maker gurgled, spun around whenever a truck's air brakes hissed in the parking lot, and checked the locks obsessively even when no one was around. The worst part was how normal everything seemed most of the time. Just me, the fluorescent lights, and the endless hum of refrigeration units. I'd started bringing headphones to work, but Jim had shut that down fast. "You need to hear them coming," he'd said, like that was a perfectly reasonable thing to tell an employee. Tonight felt different again. That same heavy air pressure I'd noticed before the black car incident. I was mopping near the coffee station trying to focus on the simple task of cleaning when the door chime rang. 2 girls walked in, identical twins, maybe 12 years old, wearing matching yellow dresses that looked like something from a vintage catalog. Bright fabric, puffy sleeves, white collars, completely wrong for the late hour and the October chill outside. They moved together like synchronized swimmers, each step perfectly timed. When one reached for a bag of chips, the other grabbed the exact same brand from a different shelf. Same motion, same timing, like they were connected by invisible strings. My hands started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the mop. Rule number 4. Retreat to the office immediately. Don't speak to them. Wait for them to leave. I backed toward the office, trying to move casually while my heart hammered against my ribs. The twins continued shopping, if you could call it that. They picked up items, examined them with identical head tilts, then set them down in perfect unison. "Excuse me," they said together, their voices blending into one sound. "We need help finding our parents." I kept backing up, not trusting myself to speak. The office door was maybe 10 feet away. I could make it. "They were supposed to pick us up," the twins continued, still speaking in perfect synchronization. "But they never came." The echo effect of their combined voices made my head throb. It was like hearing someone talk in a tunnel, but the tunnel was inside my skull, 5 feet from the office door. "We've been waiting so long," they said, and now there was a whining quality to their voices that made my teeth ache. "We just want to go home." 3 feet. I reached behind me for the door handle, and one of the twins was just there, standing right next to the office door, even though I'd been watching them both by the chip aisle 2 seconds ago. I never saw her move. "Don't go," she whispered, and her voice alone was different now. Higher, more childlike. "We're lonely." She reached out toward me, and I saw her fingernails. They weren't normal fingernails anymore. They were pointed, sharp as needles, and they kept growing as I watched. I shoved past her and slammed the office door, fumbling with the lock as both twins started screaming. The sound was like metal scraping against metal, like nails on a chalkboard amplified through a megaphone. It went right through the door, right through my skull, making my vision blur and my stomach lurch. They started banging on the door, not knocking. Banging, like they were trying to break it down with their fists. The whole frame shook with each impact. I crawled under Jim's desk, pressing my hands over my ears. The screaming continued, rising and falling in waves that made the office windows rattle. Between the impacts on the door, I could hear them talking to each other in that synchronized voice. "She won't play with us. She's being mean. We just want a friend. Make her come out. Make her play." I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to think about anything else. My bank account, which was finally looking healthier. The rent I'd been able to pay on time. The groceries I could afford now. $18 an hour, $18 an hour, $18 an hour. Something sharp scraped against the door. Long, deliberate scratches like someone drawing with a knife. The twins were still talking, but their voices were getting distorted, stretching out like a recording played at the wrong speed. "Why won't you play with us?" Under the desk, my hand brushed against something carved into the wood. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to see what it was. Claw marks. 4 parallel gouges scratched deep into the underside of Jim's desk, just like the ones on the front door. But these were old, worn smooth by time and countless hands running over them. Someone else had hidden under this desk before. Someone else had crouched here while things with claws tried to get in. The banging stopped all at once. The silence was so sudden it felt like my ears had popped. I stayed under the desk for another 10 minutes, listening for any sound. Footsteps, voices, breathing. Nothing. Finally, I crawled out and checked the security monitor. The twins were walking toward the front door, but they were moving backward, facing the camera, facing me while their feet carried them in reverse toward the exit. Their yellow dresses swayed normally, like they were walking forward, but their bodies moved in the wrong direction. They reached the door and backed right through it, never turning around, never breaking eye contact with the camera. I waited until sunrise to leave the office. When I unlocked the door, the smell hit me immediately. Something rotten, sweet, and cloying like fruit left in the sun too long. Everything the twins had touched was ruined. The bag of chips one had picked up had crumbled into gray dust that spilled across the shelf. Candy bars were covered in white mold that moved when I looked at it. Not mold, I realized with horror, but tiny squirming maggots. A bottle of soda had turned black, the liquid inside thick and viscous. I was still staring at the destruction when Jim arrived. "Twins?" he asked, taking in the rotted merchandise. "Yeah, I made it to the office." "Good." He walked over to examine the ruined candy, poking at it with a pen. Last guy who talked to them wasn't so lucky. "What happened to him?" Jim looked at me with those steel blue eyes. "He's alive, if that's what you're asking. Lives in a care facility about an hour north of here, but he only speaks in rhymes now and he won't stop grinning. Been that way for 6 years. I thought about the synchronized voices, the way they'd moved together like parts of the same organism. What are they? Don't know. Don't want to know." Jim started gathering up the rotted merchandise with rubber gloves. Some questions are more dangerous than the answers. I helped him clean up, trying not to breathe through my nose. The maggots writhed and popped when we swept them up, leaving dark stains on the floor. "Jim," I said as we worked, "how long can someone do this job?" He paused, a bag of decomposed chips in his hands. "Long as they follow the rules and don't ask too many questions." That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I've got. I drove home with the windows down again, trying to get the smell of rot out of my nose. In my rearview mirror, the truck stop looked normal in the morning light. Just another roadside business, serving coffee and gas to travelers. But I could still hear the twins' voices echoing in my head, asking why I wouldn't play with them. And I kept thinking about the man in the care facility, grinning and speaking in rhymes, trapped in whatever the twins had done to his mind. $18 an hour, I told myself, but the number was starting to feel less like a paycheck and more like the price tag on my sanity. The clock read 2:47 a.m. when I heard the door chime. My last shift before 3 days off, and I'd been counting down the hours like a prisoner marking time on a cell wall. The man who walked in was completely soaked. Water dripped from his dark trench coat in steady streams, pooling on the linoleum with each step. His hat brim sagged under the weight of moisture, sending rivulets down his face. The weird part? It hadn't rained in 3 weeks. The whole county was under a drought warning. He moved toward the counter with deliberate steps, each footfall leaving a perfect wet print behind him. Water poured off his clothes like he'd just climbed out of a lake, but somehow he never seemed to get any drier. The puddles just kept forming. My throat went tight. Rule number 5 crashed into my consciousness like a freight train. The man reached the counter and tilted his head up. Water cascaded from his collar, splashing onto the floor between us. When he spoke, his voice sounded like someone talking underwater. Distorted, bubbling, wrong. "I need a ride to the old Mitchell farm." My hands gripped the counter edge so hard my knuckles went white. The memorized directions felt clunky in my mouth, but I forced them out. Follow the road north for about 8 kilometers. Take the second left after the old grain silo. Cross the wooden bridge and keep going until you see the farmhouse. He stared at me through the water streaming down his face. His eyes were too dark, like looking into deep water at night. Are you certain you won't give me a ride? The question hung in the air between us. Water kept dripping from his coat, creating this steady rhythm like a leaky faucet. The smell hit me then. Lake water and something else. Something organic and rotten, like fish left in the sun. Follow the road north, I repeated, my voice steadier this time. Second left after the grain silo. Cross the bridge. He nodded slowly, water sloshing in his hat. Very well. The man turned and walked back toward the door, leaving a trail of puddles that reflected the fluorescent lights. I watched him push through the exit and disappear into the darkness beyond the parking lot. I waited 30 seconds, then followed the wet footprints to the front door. The trail led straight across the store, perfect boot prints filled with murky water that smelled like pond scum. But when I pressed my face to the glass and looked outside, the parking lot was empty. No man, no car, nothing. Just the 2 sleeping truckers who'd been there all night. I mopped up the puddles before Jim arrived, but the smell lingered. That stagnant water odor that made me think of things growing in the dark. The next evening, I showed up at 10:30 to find Jim standing behind the counter with someone new. A young woman with curly red hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing a purple college hoodie and jeans with deliberate rips at the knees. Taylor, meet Brittany Blair, Jim said. She's starting tonight. You'll show her the basics. Brittany smiled and stuck out her hand. Nice to meet you. Jim says you're the experienced one around here. I shook her hand, noting how soft it was. No calluses, no scars. She looked like she'd never worked anywhere more dangerous than a campus coffee shop. How experienced can I be? I said. I've only been here a month. That's experienced enough, Jim muttered, gathering his keys. Brittany, Taylor knows the procedures. Follow their lead and you'll be fine. He headed for the door, then paused. Remember what we discussed? Brittany nodded eagerly. Follow the rules no matter what. After Jim left, I pulled the laminated sheet from behind the register and handed it to her. These aren't suggestions. She read through the 5 rules, her smile fading with each line. When she finished, she looked up with a nervous laugh. This is some kind of hazing thing, right? Like initiation for new employees? My expression didn't change. Come here. I led her to the front door and pointed at the deep scratches in the wood. Rule number 1 did this. Her laugh died completely. I walked her to the office and showed her the newspaper clippings Jim kept in his desk. Derek Hawkins, found dead in his car. Maria Silva, vanished without a trace. 3 others whose names I'd memorized by now. These people worked here, I said. They broke the rules. Brittany stared at the clippings, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. This is real? I opened the lost and found box and pulled out Derek's wallet. Derek Hawkins, 28 years old. I saw him in the parking lot at 4 a.m., 3 weeks after he died. She took the wallet with shaking hands, examining the driver's license. But this is impossible. Yeah, well, $18 an hour buys a lot of impossible. I spent the next hour teaching her the register system, where the cleaning supplies were kept, how to work the coffee machine, normal job stuff. But I could see her glancing at the rule sheet every few minutes like she was trying to memorize it. What if I mess up? She asked as we restocked the candy aisle. What if I forget something? Don't forget. But what if... Then you end up like Derek or Maria. I turned to face her. Look, I get it. This is insane. A month ago, I would have laughed at anyone telling me this stuff. But I've seen things that shouldn't exist. And I'm still here because I follow those rules exactly. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The same look I'd probably had my first night when I thought Jim was playing some elaborate prank. "The hardest part," I said, "is when they use voices you recognize, when they sound like people you care about begging for help." "They?" I thought about the man in the trench coat, water pouring from his clothes, the twins in their yellow dresses, the thing with no face that had mimicked my mother's voice. "You'll find out soon enough." At 11 p.m., I gathered my stuff to leave. Brittany stood behind the counter, the rule sheet taped to the wall where she could see it clearly. "Any last advice?" she asked. I paused at the door. "Trust the rules more than your instincts. Your instincts will try to get you killed." Walking to my car, I thought about the cycle Jim had described. New employees came and went. Some lasted longer than others. A few, like Derek and Maria, didn't last at all. Now I was the experienced one, passing down the same warnings Jim had given me, teaching someone else how to survive things that shouldn't exist. I drove home wondering how long it would be before Jim was training my replacement.